Welcome to another edition of the Hologram News Network. Our main feature this week is the first in a multi-part series with our guest, Matthew Medney, the head of Star Atlas Lore. In this HNN exclusive, Matt, along with content writer Jose, gives a first look at bringing the Star Atlas metaverse to life. Over the course of several episodes, you'll discover the history, motivations, and never-heard-before lore about some of the most popular Star Atlas characters. All this and more on today's episode. Once again, I'm your host, Kriggs, and you're listening to the Hologram News Network. Around the world, a devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated southern Turkey and northern Syria earlier this week. Search and rescue efforts have been ongoing for over a week, with over 35,000 reported dead or missing. The Star Atlas Guild Coexist, a Turkish-based group, has spearheaded outreach efforts to support ongoing relief efforts. To learn more about how you can contribute towards Turkish recovery efforts, Guilds Scythe and Coexist are hosting a Twitter space alongside key members of the Star Atlas community at 12:30 Eastern Time on Tuesday, February 14th. In Star Atlas community news, the club's Vanguard Squadron hosted a Star Wars Squadrons tournament with the guilds Eclipse and Star Atlas Italia. The 3-hour tournament was sportscasted by Bulk Guild leader Egodot. The club's Vanguard Squadron, led by Agent Solace, ultimately won the friendly exhibition, with Agent Solace himself notching 18 kills in one match. Here's what Club Guild leader Lloyd had to say about the tournament. This was a friendly relationship building game. No trophies or prizes, just some Star Atlas guilds training together. However, I am happy to announce our Vanguard Squadron from the club won the tournament. Star Atlas Italia and Eclipse have some highly skilled pilots, and I hope to be flying alongside them in Star Atlas. With Star Atlas having a light week, that wraps up the news from around the community. If you have something you'd like covered or want to be featured on our show, leave us a message on Twitter or Discord. Stay tuned. After the break, we sit down with Star Atlas head of lore Matthew Medney and writer Jose as they walk through immersive experience that is Star Atlas lore. But first, a message from our sponsors.
This week's episode is brought to you by TikuBot. Automate your market buy and sell orders with ease and peace of mind. While you're away, TikuBot keeps your orders in play. Learn more at tikubot.com. That's TIGUBOT.com. TikuBot, your market made ready.
This week's special feature is the first part in our new series, Star Atlas Lore Explained. The characters of Star Atlas are filled with intrigue, adventure, curiosity, loyalty, and of course, their own self-motivations. We take a closer look at the lore behind Star Atlas and the journey in bringing this science fiction metaverse to life. Joining us today to talk about the rich history of Star Atlas is the head writer of Star Atlas lore, Matthew Medney. Alongside him is Star Atlas content writer Jose. Both individuals are the masterminds behind the vibrant world of Star Atlas. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey man, it's great to be here. Really excited.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here and talking about our lovely lore of Star Atlas.
Hey, it's a great honor to have you both on the show today. And before we begin, I think lore is a very important aspect of this project and this community. Going forward, I think it's important that people are able to hear directly from your guys's, words as we walk through the lore and help, the community maybe understand and explain it a bit. Because as we go through Star Atlas, I think one of the biggest hooks is the way people feel connected to characters. And if you look at human storytelling throughout history, people love good stories. And I think you guys here have a great story to tell. So with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you to kind of kick it off.
Thanks, Fix. And yeah, I think, storytelling is the oldest profession in recorded history, and everything that has been brought upon historically is a story that's being told to help us understand the past. And we think of lore and story at Star Atlas similarly, where we design the history before anything else. We design the past. We understand where characters have come from, why decisions might have to be made based on experiences that they've had. And that's why one of the first things that Jose and I, started architecting was a timeline that goes back 600-700 years. And that timeline is still internal because we're fine tuning it, but it's something that we're going to be sharing pretty soon. And that is, to me, how you can create really compelling stories. Because one of the other things you had just mentioned was the emotion that you get connected to a character. And, characters need to have humanizing elements so that you, as a human, can relate to them. But those elements have to be deeply seated. If you don't understand a character's parents and grandparents and great grandparents and the ways in which those actions help motivate decisions today, then you just don't connect to them in the same ways that you would if you do know that. That's why, things like Michael Jordan coming out with like, I've taken 1,000 free throws every day, or I talks about the 70 game-winning shots that he missed, not about the 150 that he made. These are all like sort of humanizing elements in that vertical, and those are sort of heir apparent because of the new movie that's coming out, and you start to see a bunch of the humanizing elements. And we think about, our characters and Joni and Mendoza and Miles from the trailer in similar ways. We really look to figure out ways in which our characters can be latched onto by not just our community that is of that faction, but even cross faction, because all stories can have empathy towards them. Jose, is there anything on that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, math is absolutely right. I feel that when I started looking at Star Atlas, my feeling was that it was the shared tale of how different civilizations rose to the stars and braved this enormous universe that's forever expanding and bringing exotic and new circumstances for them to deal with. And what Matt just said about the creating empathy with the different factions and different characters, I feel this is one of our biggest concerns and and guiding principles in Star Atlas, because we are creating entire different species. Each one of them will have their own background, and this background is what building up their story. One thing that we do that we like to as an exercise when building up the lore is setting the guiding principles of everything that we are doing, and then we can start deducting how these things would have played out in this civilization. And one of the examples that you guys that's already public here is the Miri's story. And we started with the founding myth of these civilizations. What are the main traits of the story that the Miris tell themselves to convey their values? So, what are the traps of pride, for example? Why the Miris must focus on exploration? Why survival is such an important value to them, in opposition to the Sogmian race, for example, which would die on the hill for their beliefs and circumstances.
I just want to build on that Maurice point for a second, because there's a really fun bit of lore that we had put together around the food delicacies based on the Maurice's sort of makeup. And because Maurice are, really focused on survival and efficiency, and things are not necessarily verbose in their culture, that's why when the council is formed and you have a Maurice interacting with a mud, that Maurice tend to love ice cream, because the exciting understanding that there is an enjoyment from one species, and that species can reach over the aisle to the other species and be like, hey, you don't have to be so rigid. You can have some moments of excitement. And that is a way that we were able to take these two isolated cultures, understanding how they were designed with everything Jay just said, and be like, oh, well, they would obviously be trading foods. And somebody on the mud side would be like, oh, well, maybe you want to try this because it makes us happy, and maybe that can make you happy too. And that's not necessarily a piece of lore that we just came up with out of nowhere. It's because of these guiding pillars that were created that allowed us to understand just the logical output of what would happen. And that is, I think the centerpiece to how we're really working to build the framework of the Star Atlas lore. Is we don't want to have to imagine everything from scratch. We want to have to imagine these pillars and these ideologies and then use logic to understand how that would influence each of the different species.
Yeah, exactly. And the main pillar of this whole uh, galactic architecture, if we could put it like that, is the idea of Iris and how the role that it plays around the entire cosmos, the mythology of the game, the cycles of the species, the run to acquire the resources that can be found there, the secrets, the mysteries, the races that lives there. So yeah, I feel that this, if we could narrow down the beginning of everything, I feel we would begin by talking about Iris and the Cataclysm.
I think you guys are certainly taking the right approach to building out the lore in this universe. You talk about having emotions and purpose and priorities for all of these characters. Many MMORPG games try to emulate that as well. I think the ones that take it to the next level are ones that allow the user or player to kind of step into that role where they can see themselves as either a Punab or a Miris or a Sogmian or a Ooster or Mud. And that's what really becomes the transformative moment for both the player experience and the lore itself, where it almost feels as if you are becoming part of that lore. I do want to go back just a second, and you guys mentioned timeline. If I wanted to be a Star Atlas historian, where would I start? What would be the first significant event in Star Atlas history?
The best way to discover and understand where we're going is to follow the comic series. What Tim and the team that we have behind him, that includes Jose, myself, and a few other people on game and so on and so forth, and Econ as well. And this is something that I've talked about on some Magic Eden. I think it's called Wake and Grills. Their Friday morning podcasts when we're talking about the comic. Is we really at Lore try to bring all of the departments together because we want the actions and the ideas in the lore to mirror and to motif and to allegorically connect to the way in which the company and the different departments actually work. Because to your point, we want it to blend. We want it to bleed. The lore and the emotions and the release that you get only really work if every single department feels like it's filtering up to those ideologies. And that's how we've been, we take in all of the pieces and we really do our best to make sure that lore is not built on an island of story, but that it is an amalgamation of all of the pieces coming together to make sure that it's coherent across game mechanics, economics, and story. And with that all said, the core Star Atlas comic series is sort of this first official lore story lens into the world. It happens before the Cataclysm, before the war, the Convergence War, and it sort of is the lead up and the reason why there's something worth fighting for. And I think if you saw the trailer, maybe bought a ship because a buddy told you to, and you have a tangential understanding of what is going on, but you really want to understand why there are so many people that are so excited about it. The comic series is a really great, really focused 15-ish pages a month for you to seep into learning about the Muds and the Maurice and the Punobs and the ships. And I think it's just Tim just does an incredible job distilling, drawing, and imagining a visual cue in that medium for the Star Atlas community.
Absolutely. And if I can add a little bit here, of course, we have also the events that happens, like how the galaxy started and all sorts of things. But right now, as Matt said, the story of our lifetime in Star Atlas, the story of the conflict between the factions, between the species and everything, this will be told in core. And I feel that we can make a very interesting clarification here for the Star Atlas community is that we have three very important periods of time in Star Atlas. I would say that the first one is the events that take place before Core. The second one would be Core and the Convergence War. And the third one would be the signing of the Treaty of Peace and the current days that comprehends Sage lore and everything that we have disclosed so far after the Convergence War. So I feel that, as you said, this is somewhat fragmented right now, but as we progress with Core and as we publish more articles and other pieces of the lore, all of these enormous, let's say, puzzle, you guys will feel that everything connects in a very linear and coherent way. As to say that you guys will be perfect able to see, like, for example, why it was so important that when, let's say, Gian finds the Order of Light, and you see those guys during the period of Core, and you guys will see them, for example, in the Unreal 5 world or Sage, like 100 or more years in the future, you see the evolution of this institution, this faction, this minor group, and you will also see those many side stories evolving and showing the background of the universe of the Star Atlas galaxy. I feel this is one of the most exciting stuff when telling a story, showing the background of what's happening as well.
So we know a lot about the present day, and you guys have released much of those details kind of in your Atlas Star and roadmap scans, lore tidbits. You guys are building out the, let's say, 100 years prior to the present day out in the Core series, which is, we're just released the 4th episode, and then the 5th episode will be coming out next month. And then what we don't know a lot about is the Cataclysm. And I assume that that is probably the biggest spoiler of all. And that's probably one of the bigger events that you guys will tease out as, what caused the Cataclysm and, from Cataclysm onwards towards the discovery of the Cataclysm. But back over to you guys, if you guys want to talk about, the factions themselves and kind of some of their motivations.
Yeah. I think, obviously, we all know the Uni are made up of 4 species, and then we have the Muds and the Oosters, and that's sort of our core groups, and then a couple of other non-council member species that we have as well. But, I think what's interesting about a faction like the Uni, for instance, is it's almost a 2-prong faction, right? Because they had to figure out a way to coalesce themselves as individual species and align on a number of ideologies and on a number of important items, such as, is there going to be a unified military? Do they have the same temperament for the types of weapons they use, et cetera, and then unify that to show a united front with the Muds and the Oosters, and that to me makes them some of the more interestingly complex species because they have this duality to them. And there are some things that we are doing in the background that we can't fully announce yet that I am writing myself that will explore these ideas in more detail, which I'm really excited about. We're having a lot of fun exploring that duality of these species. And then on the Mud side, you have these sort of effectively technologists, and the separation between the human race with the Ecos and the Muds, and those are sort of, I look at it, and Jose, please add on here. That's sort of the fork in the road that we are seeing today, with climate and the ecology of our planet and Mother Nature, and the need and proliferation and demand to see how far we can push technology. And I think those two are equally really interesting to contemplate what would happen in 100 years, in 200 years, in 400 years, in 600 years. How do those threads that started off as maybe a small fork just V out so much that they're almost undistinguishable from where they originated from?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. And one thing that's very important for us to understand in the Star Atlas lore and overall, and any narrative when you are building entire civilizations and groups and factions, is the fact that even when we are considering a mud, not every mud thinks of the world in the same way as another. This is a simplification of the reasoning of a species, and that's what happens also in your world as well. Like all Brazilians like carnival, for example. It's one that I heard a lot. Everyone asks me if I play football, soccer, and this is also something that we like to show in the Star Atlas lore. Every species in Star Atlas, every faction, you see lots of different groups trying to seize power and influence the overall culture of a civilization. And I think that the species that shows this more radically are the Punabs, as we have literally two branches of the same species claiming to be the one and true only representative of the Punab species, you know? And as we would disclose more details about their lore, for the outside bystander that's seeing them talking to one another, the difference between the two of them are pretty much non-existent. But for a Punab who is involved, who is inside the discussion, he couldn't see something farther away from the idea of a Punab than the other group of his species, you know? And what Matt said about humanity, about the conflict between the muds and the ecos, is pretty much something like that. As you know, R has come to planet Earth at some point in the story of Star Atlas, and he created a spell that made everyone in the human civilization see the image of their god, telling them that they should rise to the stars and pretty much destroy their planet to get the resources to do this technological revolution. And that's where the great, but before that, humanity was already divided. I mean, maybe that's why R could do a spell of this size and magnitude with the whole species. Maybe it's because humanity already wanted to depart from a part of its essence, of its essence. And this conflict between, let's say, the two parts of the human soul will be a constant theme in the fights between the Mud and the Equals faction. I feel this is going to be an entertaining story to tell.
And that concludes this week's episode and the first part of our HNN exclusive with Matthew Medney, the head of Star Atlas lore. Next week, Matt and Jose take us on a continuation of our journey through Star Atlas. Make sure to subscribe to get notified when our episodes release, and that you get the Star Atlas news you need to stay one step ahead. Once again, I'm your host, Kriggs, and you're listening to the Hologram News Network.